The park was silent, with the wind gently swaying the trees. Lucia, sitting on a secluded bench, held her crumpled wedding veil between her trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the ground, lost in thought. She couldn't process the sudden abandonment of Raphael, her fiancé, just 7 days before the wedding. Lucia. Miguel's familiar voice echoed, bringing her back. He was coming from the market, carrying a bag. As soon as he saw her, he stopped abruptly. "What happened? Why are you crying?" She looked up, which shone with sadness. "He left me, Miguel." Raphael left. He said he wasn't ready. "How am I going to face my family now?" She blurted out as new tears flowed. Miguel sat next to her, not knowing what to say. Finally, he held her shoulder gently. "You're not alone, Lucia. And maybe I can help you." She looked at him confused, not understanding what he meant. Lucia looked at Miguel with a confused expression, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Help me? What do you mean, Miguel?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "What if we got married?" he said directly, completely surprising her. "What?" he exclaimed, somewhere between shock and disbelief. "This has to be a joke." "It's not a joke," he replied seriously. "Look, you don't want to face the shame of canceling the wedding, and I'm tired of my family's demands. If we get married, just for appearances, it solves this for both sides." Lucia shook her head, laughing nervously. "That's insane, Miguel. How do you think that would work?" "Simple," he explained. "The wedding is already planned. You don't lose anything, and I gain peace. It's an agreement. No marital obligations, no complications." She hesitated, looking at the veil in her hands. The idea seemed absurd, but at the same time it made sense. "I need to think about it," she said, still uncertain. "Think about it," Miguel replied. "I just want to help." That night, Lucia barely slept a wink. Miguel's proposal spun in her mind like an incessant wheel. Every time she thought about saying no, she remembered the shame she would face if she called off the wedding, the intrusive questions from her family, and above all, her mother's judgmental gaze. On the other hand, accepting seemed crazy. Getting married without love? To Miguel, her childhood friend? It would be like an elaborate theater, too high a risk. The next morning, as the sun timidly appeared on the horizon, she made a decision. She picked up the phone and called Miguel. He answered almost immediately, as if he had been expecting her call. "I accept," she said, her voice low but firm. On the other end, Miguel took a deep breath before answering. "Are you sure? Because once we do it, we can't go back so easily." "I am," Lucia replied, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. "But on one condition. This is temporary. As soon as everything calms down, we can go on with our lives as normal." "Deal," Miguel agreed, with a slight note of relief in his voice. "I promise I won't complicate anything." In the days that followed, Lucia and Miguel began planning their whirlwind wedding. It was surreal to transform an event that had once seemed like her life's dream into something that was now merely strategic. The dress, which she had bought with such care, would be worn. The venue had already been booked, and the families believed that everything was going according to plan. However, small details began to reveal the strangeness of the situation. As she tried on her wedding dress, Lucia looked at herself in the mirror and felt a pang of sadness. This was not how she imagined her big day. On the other hand, Miguel, always cheerful and playful, seemed to be taking everything lightly. He even rehearsed jokes for his speech at dinner. "Doesn't all this seem a little absurd?" asked Lucia, in a moment of hesitation, as they discussed the details of the ceremony. "Of course it is," Miguel replied with a smile. "But you know what's even more absurd? We think that life will always follow the script we planned. So why not improvise a little?" Lucia laughed, even though she didn't mean to, and realized that, despite everything, Miguel managed to bring a lightness to the situation. Maybe this wasn't the complete disaster she imagined. On the wedding day, the sun shone with an unexpected intensity, as if the universe wanted to challenge the seriousness of the moment. Lucia was radiant in her dress, although her smile was restrained. Miguel, wearing an elegant suit, seemed more confident than ever. They exchanged simple vows, but full of meaning to outsiders. No one suspected that it was just an agreement. While the guests danced and toasted, Miguel approached Lucia and said, in a playful tone, "Congratulations, Mrs. Fake Wife." She laughed, shaking her head. "Congratulations, Mr. Temporary Husband." But, while the smiles spread across both of their faces, a question hanging in the air was this: really temporary? Or were they planting something that would change their lives forever? The honeymoon began as an extension of the theater they had put on for their families. Lucia and Miguel arrived at the seaside resort early in the afternoon, and everything seemed perfect. The room they had booked was luxurious, with a large double bed in the center, decorated with flower petals, and a balcony that overlooked the ocean. "Well, at least they went all out with the room," Miguel joked, throwing his backpack on the couch. Lucia crossed her arms, looking at him. "Miguel, we have to establish some clear rules. This here is just a facade, remember?" He raised his hands in surrender. "Of course, Lucia. I didn't expect anything different. You can have the bed, and I'll sleep on the couch. No drama." She sighed in relief. "Great. I want to make that clear." Despite her reassuring words, living in such close quarters soon revealed the underlying tension. Lucia tried hard to keep up her facade when they were in public, but the formality between them in the bedroom was uncomfortable. Miguel, on the other hand, seemed to want to break the ice with constant banter. "Did you know you snore?" he commented casually one morning as they drank coffee on the balcony. She gave him a sharp look. "I don't snore." "Well, I have proof," he replied with a mischievous smile, holding up his cell phone as if he had recorded something. "You're impossible," Lucia muttered, fighting a smile. Although Miguel tried to keep the mood light, something in his demeanor began to change. He couldn't deny that he was observing Lucia in a different way. The way the wind ruffled her hair as they walked along the beach, or the way she laughed, even when she tried to hide her smile. Everything seemed to take on a new intensity. Lucia, for her part, began to notice Miguel's attentions, but pretended not to notice. She was determined to keep things strictly within the scope of their agreement. After all, any slip-up could further complicate what was already a delicate arrangement. Everything seemed under control until Miguel made an impulsive decision. One night, while they were at the resort's restaurant, he noticed an elegant and stunning woman sitting alone at the bar. Isabella, as she introduced herself, was charming and engaging. Miguel, in an unconscious attempt to test Lucia's feelings, began to flirt with her. Lucia, who was watching the scene from afar, maintained her composure. However, inside, she felt a mixture of anger and disappointment. She wasn't sure why this affected her so much, since the marriage was just an agreement. But seeing him smiling at another woman made her uncomfortable. "Have fun," she said coldly as she walked past Miguel, feigning disinterest. He watched her leave, a pang of frustration piercing his chest. He wanted her to react, to show something more, but all he received was that cutting coldness. Miguel returned to the room later, but the silence between them was deafening. Lucia locked herself in the bathroom for a while, trying to compose herself. When she came out, she found Miguel lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. "Good night, Miguel," she said dryly, turning off the lights and lying down on the bed. "Good night, Lucia," he replied, his voice carrying more than just tiredness. Despite their jokes and easygoing exterior, they both knew they were walking on increasingly shaky ground. The honeymoon was not only testing the limits of their agreement, but also the limits of their own feelings. Miguel woke up on the couch that morning with the first rays of sunlight invading the room. The air seemed heavier than ever, and the silence between him and Lucia was no longer something comfortable, but an invisible barrier that grew larger with each passing day. He got up slowly, looked at the empty bed, and realized that she had already left. Lucia was on the beach, sitting on a lounge chair, her bare feet buried in the sand. She stared at the horizon, as if trying to find answers in the waves that came and went. Her mind was full of confusing thoughts about Miguel. The scene of him flirting with Isabella at the bar the night before still bothered her, although she tried to convince herself that it didn't matter. Meanwhile, Miguel, determined to provoke a reaction from Lucia, began spending more time with Isabella. He knew it wasn't the right thing to do, but something inside him wanted to test the limits. Maybe if Lucia showed jealousy, he would get confirmation of the feelings he was beginning to suspect she had for him. That afternoon, Lucia returned to her room and found Miguel laughing in the restaurant with Isabella. He was leaning casually in his chair, with that carefree smile she knew so well. Something inside her broke. She took a deep breath, fighting the urge to go over and confront him. "You can't be like this, Lucia. He's just your friend," she muttered to herself, trying to control her feelings. But the words didn't ring true. Later, in the room, Miguel returned with a carefree air. "Hi," he said, as if nothing had happened. "Hi," she replied coldly, without even looking at him. Miguel set his things down on the table and watched Lucia, who seemed busy packing something in her suitcase. He sensed the tension in the air, but decided to ignore it. "Have you seen Isabella today? She's an interesting character," he commented casually, testing the waters. Lucia slammed her suitcase shut and stared at him. "If you're so interested in her, maybe you should invite her to stay in this room. I can move to another one." The icy tone of her response took Miguel by surprise. He opened his mouth to say something, but decided against it. Lucia left the room soon after, leaving him alone. That night, Miguel realized that his jealous strategy was backfiring. Instead of making Lucia show something, he seemed to be pushing her further away. But he didn't know how to fix things, or even if he should try. After all, this marriage was just an agreement, right? However, deep down, Miguel felt that something important was changing inside him. Lucia's smile, the way she looked at the sea, or even her irritated silence. All of this was starting to have a different meaning. But now he wondered if he had gone too far. Lucia, in turn, no longer knew what was harder: keeping up the facade or dealing with the conflicting feelings that were growing inside her. Lucia spent the night awake. While the world outside seemed calm, the turmoil inside her intensified. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Miguel smiling at Isabella, as if she wasn't there, as if she didn't matter. It was eating away at her in a way she couldn't explain, and the cruel truth began to form in her mind: that fake marriage was becoming unsustainable. By dawn, the decision had been made. Lucia could no longer stay there, pretending that everything was fine. She had to leave. She grabbed her suitcase, emptied the drawers, and began folding her clothes meticulously, trying to keep control over the emotions that threatened to overflow. Miguel entered the room at that moment, carrying a coffee in one hand and a croissant in the other. He stopped at the door, surprised to see her packing her things. "Lucia, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice full of confusion. She didn't turn around. She continued folding her clothes, her movements precise, as if each piece was a way of organizing her thoughts. "I'm leaving, Miguel." The statement hung in the air like a dull blow. Miguel placed the coffee on the table, approaching her slowly. "Leaving? What do you mean? We were still on our honeymoon." Lucia finally looked at him, her eyes steady but full of hurt. "This isn't a honeymoon, Miguel. It never was. It's just an act, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. You can stay here and enjoy the rest of the trip with whoever you want." He frowned, clearly bothered. "Lucia, it's not like that. You can't just leave. We agreed that. We agreed that it would be a fake marriage, Miguel." She interrupted, her voice louder than she intended. "And now I'm putting an end to this charade. I'm going to file for divorce as soon as I get back." Her words came as a shock to Miguel. He tried to process what he was hearing, but his emotions came flooding back before he could react clearly. "Lucia, wait. Is this because of Isabella?" "Because..." She held up her hand, interrupting him. "Don't make this any harder than it already is. Isabella is just a symptom, Miguel. The problem is, this should never have happened. I was stupid to think that something like this could work." Miguel felt a tightness in his chest, something he couldn't explain. The idea of Lucia leaving hit him unexpectedly, as if a void had opened up before him. "Lucia, please." She shook her head, already picking up her suitcase and heading towards the door. "Don't make this harder, Miguel. Just let me go." When the door closed behind her, Miguel stood in the middle of the room, unable to move. The silence that had previously seemed merely uncomfortable was now unbearable. He realized too late that something precious was slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Lucia walked towards the taxi, her heart heavy and her eyes teary. As much as she wanted to believe that she was doing the right thing, the feeling of loss was overwhelming. She didn't know if she was running away from Miguel or from herself, but she knew she couldn't stay any longer. Miguel stayed in the room for a long time, trying to organize his thoughts that seemed chaotic and disjointed. Lucia's empty suitcase, the echo of her words, the image of the door closing, all of this hit him like a weight. Impossible to ignore. He knew that, somehow, he had messed up, but what bothered him even more was a truth that was beginning to emerge. He missed Lucia, and not just as a friend or a partner in the deal. He missed her in a deeper, more visceral way. Night fell, and Miguel, unable to bear the silence, went for a walk along the beach. The waves lapped rhythmically against the sand, but unlike the calming effect they usually had, this time they seemed to echo his own restlessness. Each step on the sand made him remember moments with Lucia. The sound of her laughter, the way she crossed her arms when she was upset, the sparkle in her eyes as she looked out at the sea. He realized that these little details were exactly what made Lucia special. As he walked, he saw Isabella at the bar, surrounded by other tourists. She waved at him, but Miguel just shook his head and kept walking. He felt that this game of provoking jealousy had been the stupidest thing he had ever done. Now, Isabella seemed insignificant, almost an empty distraction compared to Lucia's genuine presence. The next day, Miguel woke up determined to do something. He had lost Lucia, but he couldn't just accept it without a fight. He picked up the phone and tried to call her. No answer. He sent a message, but the silence that came back was more deafening than he expected. Each failed attempt increased his anguish. That was when he remembered what Lucia had said before she left. "I'm going to file for divorce as soon as I get back." That meant she was probably already on her way home. Miguel felt a chill run down his spine. If he left things as they were, he might never have the chance to fix what he had destroyed. He needed to act and fast. He picked up the phone again, this time to book a ticket for the first flight to their city. The hotel receptionist, who noticed Miguel's distressed expression, asked if everything was okay. Miguel simply replied, "No, but I'll fix it." In the taxi to the airport, as the driver fought the traffic, Miguel mentally went over everything he was going to say to Lucia. He knew he would have to be honest in a way he had never been before. He couldn't hide behind excuses or the deal they had made. He had to admit the obvious. He loved her. When he got to the airport, he realized he was one step behind. Lucia's flight had already taken off. He felt a wave of despair as he looked at the departures board, but he couldn't give up now. Miguel knew where she lived, knew where to find her. He had to believe there was still time. As Lucia's plane pulled away from the resort, she looked out the window, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief at leaving behind something that clearly wasn't working. Sadness at not being able to deny that Miguel had somehow become important to her. But for Lucia, that was in the past. Or at least that's what she tried to convince herself. The plane landed at dusk. Lucia, tired and emotionally drained, pulled her suitcase through the airport lobby. All she wanted was to get home, lock herself in her room, and forget the last few days. The familiar air of the city, which normally comforted her, seemed indifferent now. She sighed as she took a taxi, ready to face the silence she had both longed for and feared. Miguel, on the other hand, was a step behind but determined. After missing her flight, he wasted no time. He arrived in the city that same night and, without stopping to rest, went straight to Lucia's building. He knew the way by heart. The elevator seemed to move too slowly, and when it finally reached her floor, he hesitated for a second before knocking on the door. Lucia was unpacking her bags when she heard the firm knocking. Her heart raced. She wasn't expecting anyone. With a mix of curiosity and irritation, she went to the door. When she opened it, she froze. Miguel was there, his eyes filled with emotion. "Miguel?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said bluntly, stepping in before she could protest. "I couldn't let things end like this." Lucia crossed her arms, trying to appear nonchalant. "Miguel, there's nothing to talk about. We've been clear about what this was from the beginning. It was an agreement," he agreed, looking straight at her. "But, Lucia, something has changed. I've changed, and I need you to know that. She shook her head, giving a bitter laugh. You've changed? Miguel, you were flirting with another woman on our honeymoon. How do you expect me to believe you now? Miguel felt the blow, but didn't look away. I did it because I was an idiot. I thought it might provoke a reaction from you, make you show, I don't know, anything that would show me that you felt something for me too. Feel something for you, she repeated in disbelief. Miguel, this marriage was supposed to be a temporary solution, a facade. We both agreed to it, and I was stupid enough to believe I could keep it that way, he replied, his voice shaking with emotion. But, Lucia, I can't pretend anymore. I love you, and if you don't feel the same way, I'll leave now, but I needed to tell you this. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucia blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. His words seemed to echo in her mind, reaching layers she had tried to ignore. You don't know what you're saying, she finally replied, but her voice was weaker. This is just guilt or regret. It will pass. It won't pass, Lucia, he said, slowly moving closer. You're the first person I've ever truly cared about. I know I messed up, but let me try to fix it. Let me be the husband you truly deserve. She wanted to reject those words, push him away, and keep the wall she had built around herself. But something inside her wavered. Tears began to form, and her voice cracked as she answered, What if you're wrong? What if I am? Miguel held her hands, his eyes fixed on hers. Then let's find out together. Please, Lucia, give me a chance. She hesitated for a moment, but in that look, she found something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And without saying anything, she took a small step forward, closing the distance between them. That was all Miguel needed. Lucia took a step forward, but stopped before Miguel could get any closer. She needed to clarify something, even if her mind and heart were in a storm. Miguel, don't think that pretty words will solve everything. I need to know that you're being sincere. This can't be just another farce. He nodded, his eyes fixed on hers. I understand. I'm not here to promise perfection, but I'm here to show you that I want to try. Really? Lucia pulled away, hugging herself, as if she needed protection from the vulnerability she felt. I don't know if I can trust you, Miguel. All of this happened too fast. And what happened on that honeymoon? It was a mistake, Miguel interrupted without hesitation. I was confused, trying to figure out what I felt for you, and I did the wrong thing. But, Lucia, if there's one thing I know now, it's that I don't want to lose you. Not as a friend. Not as anything more. She sighed, looking down at the floor. You know this isn't going to be easy, right? It's not just about saying you love me. It's about proving it. Miguel gave her a small smile, a mix of relief and defiance. I didn't expect it to be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. In the days that followed, Miguel began to rebuild the trust between them, one step at a time. He respected Lucia's space, but made sure to be there when she needed him. Small gestures, like showing up with her favorite coffee or helping her with her daily chores, began to show Lucia that he was committed to making it work. Lucia, in turn, struggled with her own fears and doubts. Even though Miguel was trying hard, she still wondered if it was possible to build something real from such a shaky beginning. Still, she couldn't deny that her heart beat faster when he was around. One night, as they sat on the couch, Lucia broke the silence. Miguel, why do you think this can work? After everything, why even try? He looked at her seriously. Because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I know I've messed up a lot, but I don't want you to be one of them. His words struck a chord deep within Lucia. For the first time, she felt like there might be a chance for them to rebuild something real. With a shy smile, she said, Then I guess we can start from scratch. But Miguel, this time, no lies. Everything has to be real. He smiled, holding her hand carefully. Really, Lucia? Always? The days turned into weeks, and Miguel and Lucia began to discover the rhythm of a relationship that was finally genuine. Without the weight of lies or facades, their moments together acquired an unexpected lightness. They began to really get to know each other, not just as friends or accomplices in an agreement, but as two people trying to build something real. However, not everything was simple. Lucia still felt an invisible barrier. something that made her hesitant to fully immerse herself in the relationship. Miguel realized this, but respected her time, believing that constant effort would show her commitment. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, the same one where it all began, Miguel suddenly stopped. He looked at Lucia, who was distracted by the children playing on a swing, and took a deep breath. "Lucia, can I ask you something?" She turned to him. She looked at him, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "Sure, what is it? Are you still afraid that I'll let you down?" he asked, his eyes fixed on hers. Lucia opened her mouth to answer, but hesitated. Instead, she sighed. "It's not exactly fear, Miguel. It's a scar. It's not something that disappears overnight." Miguel nodded slowly. "I understand, but I want you to know that I'm here to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes. Because you're worth it." She smiled, lightly touching his hand. "I know, and I think that's what scares me the most, knowing that I'm starting to believe in you." That night, while they were having dinner at Miguel's house, he surprised Lucia by placing a small box on the table. She looked at it confused. "What's this?" Miguel smiled nervously. "Just open it." Lucia took the box and carefully lifted the lid. Inside was a simple but incredibly beautiful wedding ring. She was speechless. "Lucia," Miguel began, his voice thick with emotion, "I know we've been married before, but this time I want it to be for real. No deals, no pretenses. Just you and me, facing everything together. Will you start over with me? Marry me for real?" Tears welled in Lucia's eyes as she looked at him, feeling the weight of his words and the sincerity in Miguel's gaze. For a moment, all of their complicated past disappeared, leaving only the present and the possibility of a future. "Yes," she whispered, a smile shining through her tears. "Yes, Miguel, I do." The embrace that followed was more than a celebration. It was confirmation that they were both ready to leave the past behind and build something new together. Lucia and Miguel had finally found not only love, but also the courage to live that love fully. And as the city glowed with the lights of the night, they knew that this was not the end of their story, but only the beginning.